Back in grade 8, I was obsessed with the paranormal. I had a girlfriend at the time who was really into Wicca, and she was the one who got me into all of this stuff. Before long, we were playing with a Ouija board every single day. About a month of using it regularly, it started identifying itself the same way every time. We would ask, "Who are we speaking with?" And the reply was always, "him." At first, we weren't really scared. We were just kids, but him eventually turned hostile. The board started swearing, telling us to get lost, as well as other colourful words, and I got weirdly angry about it one day and just flipped the board off the table mid-session and stopped playing for a bit after that. But things didn't stop. A few weeks later, I was working the night shift at Walmart stocking shelves, when out of nowhere I heard a whisper, just my name. I thought I imagined it, but then it happened again louder. I checked the next aisle to see if someone was messing with me, but no one was there. Then the third whisper came. It was loud enough that I actually yelled out, "Hello? Who's calling my name?" but received no reply. Maybe 40 seconds later, a coworker walked up to me. She looked shaken. She asked if I heard my name being called 3 times, and when I said, "Yeah," she told me she was a medium, and that it was a sign that someone in my family was going to pass away. I thought it was kind of weird for her to come up to me with full confidence and call herself a medium. I'm into the paranormal, but I reserve skepticism, so I tried to keep the conversation regular and started talking about my plans for the future. She interrupted me mid-sentence, looking right at me. "Every time you talk about your future, I can hear something snickering, like something negative is attached to you trying to ruin your plans." She, of course, had no idea about the board. I hardly knew her. I felt the blood drain from my face as I instantly connected that with him. I went home after my shift and got into bed, only to be woken up by the house phone. I heard my mum in the hall saying, "Oh no, that's terrible. I'm so sorry." It was at that moment I felt adrenaline surge through my body. Before she even hung up, I was downstairs asking what happened. She told me a member of our family, someone I didn't really have a relationship with, had just passed away. I was absolutely crapping my underwear. But the Walmart experience honestly made me feel way more intrigued. Even though it was freaky as hell, having it all confirmed like that just made me want to push it further. I invited my best friend and my girlfriend over to play in my parents' basement, and that was the last time I played for several years. It was midday, and no one was home. We had been playing for about 20 minutes when suddenly the 3 of us started randomly smelling breakfast sausage frying. It was unmistakable and completely out of place. We asked the board if that was him, and it said yes. My parents came home later and made us supper. We paused to eat, and then went right back to the basement to play. We were really pushing it now, asking the board to prove it was there. We were asking it to touch us, and we were moving around the room trying to feel for cold spots. Eventually, my girlfriend and I agreed to take it a step further, and I asked the board if it could possess her. The planchette then moved to yes faster than I'd ever seen and began a countdown. 3, 2, 1. And like we were in some cheap B-rate horror movie, the light bulb over our head began to buzz and flicker and went out. We were all plunged into complete darkness. I screamed at the top of my lungs and fumbled as I ran upstairs. As I got into the living room and my dad was watching TV, I saw the sky through the big window flash a bright white, and the transformer across the street had blown. I didn't know how it worked, but in my mind the transformer blowing should have been the cause of the lights going out. But the light bulb above us buzzed and died first, and then 15 seconds later we were already upstairs when the transformer went. My buddy was still downstairs swearing. He tried to run but slammed into a wall in the dark. In the heightened scare of the moment, and trying to explain the chaos to my parents, I kind of forgot about my girlfriend. 20 seconds later, she casually walked up the stairs and looked like she had no idea why there was any commotion at all. There wasn't 1 ounce of fear in her. She walked past me in a voice that did not sound like her own and muttered something chilling. "What?" I said, and she looked at me and said, "What?" in her normal voice, acting like she hadn't said a word. Then she did the exact same thing to my body, and I told her she needed to go home. She lived around the block and she walked home. My buddy and I, who I'm still friends with to this day, pretty much slept with the lights on for a month, and I actually ran away from home that night because I was so freaked out. My parents later told me it was just a coincidence. Wind blew a branch into it, I accept that. However, around 10 years ago at a family function it came up. They just said coincidence to calm me down, because there was no wind that night. This was about 8 years ago while living at my parents' house. I had several nights where I had trouble sleeping due to hearing whispering in my room. I couldn't make out what was being said, but I could tell it was a little girl's voice. It freaked me out so bad, I started asking my sister to sleep in my room with me some nights. I told her about hearing voices, but that's it. Nothing about it being a whisper or the age or gender. I didn't want to freak her out, so I just told her I was probably just being paranoid about sleeping alone in the basement. I left for college that year and it became her room. When I came home for break, she said to me, "I hear a little girl whispering sometimes. Was it the voice you heard? A little girl too?" A few months later, she hosted a young life gathering at our parents' house. There was this one kid in her group that had confided in them that he had a demon following him around. I don't know if people believed him or what, but that's what he told people. Well, after this gathering, he pulled my sister aside and said, "There are 2 little girls. I can see them playing in your backyard. Do you know anything about them?" That summer, we were back to sharing the room. One night, we were laying in bed, both on our phones, when we saw what looked like a camera flash come from one side of the room. We both ignored it, partially because we were hoping it was the other one of us accidentally taking a Snapchat selfie with the wrong camera, and we were too scared to acknowledge if it wasn't that. We spoke about it the next day. It came from where the bedroom door is, but the door was shut. It was close to the ceiling. There are no outlets or windows in that area. The blinds were shut on the opposite side of the room, and there's no chance it was a headlight of a car. I've seen car headlights in this room before, but this was very different, just like a camera flash, and it lit up the room for a split second. It was unexplainable. A few nights later, we discussed the flash again before we went to bed, and then while we're both laying awake on our phones again, we saw it. There was no communication. We just both grabbed each other, pulled the blankets over our heads, and called our dad to come and check it out. There was again no explanation, and it came from the same area of the room. We finally told our parents about everything going on, and my mum had the priest come and bless our house. He told us on his way over he had a strong feeling that the enemy didn't want me to come here today. Another thing to note, this room that all these experiences happened in was an extension of the basement that was dug out a few years prior. Nothing has happened in the house since the blessing. But we recently disclosed all of this to our other sibling, and one of them told us of an experience she had within the last year. While she was home alone around 8 p.m. in the hot tub under the deck, she saw a huge orb-type light coming quickly towards her from the woods. She described it like a train coming straight at her. She said she screamed, closed her eyes, and put her hands up in front of her face, but when she opened her eyes, it wasn't gone. She didn't know about our experiences, never told us any of this until we brought up our own.
I was 29 when this happened. For a few years, I volunteered at a small church in a rural town. Nothing official. I wasn't part of the clergy or anything like that. I just helped out when they needed extra hands. setting up tables for community dinners, stacking chairs after events, carrying boxes of decorations up and down the stairs. The sort of jobs that always need doing but nobody really notices. The church itself wasn't especially old, but a lot of the congregation had been attending for decades. Some of the older members had been there longer than I'd been alive. The basement was where everything ended up. Christmas decorations, old records, unused furniture, boxes of donated items. If something didn't have a place upstairs, sooner or later it found its way downstairs. Because of that, I spent a lot of time there. The basement wasn't creepy either. That's probably important to mention. It wasn't some ancient stone cellar with chains on the wall. It was well lit, clean and used regularly. There was a meeting room, a small kitchen, several storage areas, and rows of shelves filled with things the church had accumulated over the years. If you'd asked me at the time whether I was afraid of it, I would have laughed. What I did notice, though, was that people didn't seem to like being down there alone. Nobody talked about it directly. Nobody said it was haunted. But if somebody needed something from the basement, they almost always found a reason to bring someone with them. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then one evening, I asked an older volunteer named Margaret if she could help me carry some folding tables upstairs. She agreed immediately, then added, "I'll help you bring them up, but I'm not staying down there." I remember laughing because I thought she was joking. She didn't laugh. I asked why. She shrugged. Never liked that basement. That was all she said. Over the next year, I noticed similar comments from other people. Just little things. An older man saying he preferred not to go downstairs after dark. A woman asking someone to accompany her when she needed to fetch supplies. Nobody ever explained why. The strange thing was that nobody seemed particularly interested in discussing it. The topic would come up for a few seconds, and then disappear again. I didn't think much about it. Then came the fundraiser. Every year the church held a large community dinner. It usually ran late and required a lot of cleanup afterward. By the time the last guests left, most volunteers were exhausted. That night, there were only 3 of us left. Myself, another volunteer, and one of the church elders. We spent nearly an hour putting everything away. Eventually the other volunteer left. The elder headed upstairs to lock the main entrance. That left me carrying the final stack of folding chairs into the basement storage area alone. I remember checking my phone. It was just after 11. The basement was quiet in the way large buildings have become quiet after everyone leaves. Not silent, but just empty. The hum of the lights, the occasional creak from somewhere overhead. I carried the chairs to the far end of the storage area and started stacking them. When I finished, I turned around and noticed somebody standing near the opposite wall. My first reaction wasn't fear. It wasn't even surprise. I simply assumed it was the elder. The figure was standing still with its back towards me. Nothing about it immediately seemed unusual. I remember saying, "Need anything before I head up?" No response. I figured he hadn't heard me. The room was fairly large, so I took a few steps forward. Still no response. That's when I started paying attention. The elder was in his 70s. The person standing there wasn't. At least, I don't think they were. The build was wrong. Too slim, too upright. For a second I actually wondered whether somebody had somehow remained in the church after the fundraiser. Maybe a guest looking for a restroom? Maybe another volunteer? I honestly don't know. What bothered me was how still they were. Not frozen, but just standing there, facing the wall. The distance between us wasn't huge anymore. I called out again. No response. Then, the figure slowly turned its head. Only its head. The rest of the body remained facing forward. To this day, I can't properly explain what I saw. I didn't see a face clearly. I didn't see glowing eyes. What I saw was enough of a profile to immediately realize I didn't recognize the person. And at the exact same moment, I had one of those feelings that people struggle to describe afterward. The sort where your brain decides something is wrong before you've consciously worked it out. Every instinct I had suddenly wanted me upstairs, immediately. I looked away for maybe a second, not even that. Just long enough to glance toward the staircase. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But the room wasn't large enough for someone to disappear without making noise. There were no doors nearby, no shelves tall enough to hide behind. Nothing. The space where they'd been standing was empty. I stood there for several seconds waiting for the person to reappear. They didn't. Eventually, I walked upstairs much faster than I'd like to admit. The elder was locking the front doors. I asked if he'd been downstairs. He looked at me, confused, and he said he'd been upstairs the entire time. I almost told him what I'd seen. Instead, I decided to ask him how long he'd been attending the church. He laughed and said almost 40 years. Then, he asked why. I don't know what made me ask the next question. Maybe I was hoping for reassurance. I said, "Has anybody ever complained about the basement?" His expression changed slightly. Not fear, recognition. Like I'd asked a question he'd heard before. After a few seconds he said, "People have said things over the years." I asked what kind of things. He shook his head. Mostly, they stopped talking about it. That wasn't the answer I wanted. I asked if he'd ever experienced anything himself. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I don't spend time down there alone." And that was the end of the conversation. I've never seen the figure again. I still volunteered there for another couple of years. I went into the basement hundreds of times afterwards. Nothing ever happened. But every now and then, usually when I was down there by myself, I'd find myself looking toward that section of the room. Not because I expected to see somebody, but because part of me was still trying to work out who I'd seen that night. Or, perhaps more accurately, who I hadn't.
There was a time where I went on a trip in the mountains of North Carolina with a group of friends back in the summer of 2020. The Airbnb we stayed in was a beautiful 3-story cabin. We were all in the start of our 20s and of course decided it was a good time to go and drink and do whatever drugs we had. During one of those times, a friend and I were tasked to go into the basement and cut tabs for everyone, which also meant we had to be in the cold basement in the dark without being able to use any lights. The only light I was able to use was the phone on my lock screen. As I'm holding my phone for my friend to cut the tabs, I start looking down at my feet, waiting. My eyes then slowly start adjusting to the dark, so I started to see and hear a bit of shifting movement behind us. I felt as if we were being watched and surrounded, but I decided to brush it off and told my friend to try and hurry. She agreed. I then looked over to the stone staircase we came down, which is when I made eye contact with something. On the steps, peering around the corner of the last few steps, was some kind of dark being. The entity appeared to be made entirely of black static. It didn't have eyes or any real features, but it felt as if we were just staring at each other for a good solid 5 seconds. My whole body had just gone still, so I couldn't do anything else but stare, and then I watched it slowly creep back behind the stairs, letting go of the wall. After that, I told the friend that I was with we needed to go now without trying to scare her. But she looked at me and told me, "I know, I see them too." We went upstairs after that and decided not even to mention it, especially since our friends were about to be tripping. To this day we never spoke about it, and thinking about it gives me chills. It certainly changed my view on the supernatural.
So my friend was living in this apartment building, where all floors were his. His bathroom was in the basement, and opposite the bathroom, there was a room that always seemed locked. One day I was using his bathroom, and when I was done, I noticed that the room across the hall had its door slightly opened, which I thought was odd. I told my friend that the door was open, and he rushed down to shut it and lock it, and we didn't speak more of it at this time. About a week later, I was again using his bathroom. On the way in, I double-checked the door across the room. It was shut, so I just did what you usually do in bathrooms. And when I got out, I saw the door was open again. This time, my friend came down and we both stared at the door. I asked him if I could look inside. He was nervous but said, "It's creepy in there. It's where my mum's doll collection is." Sure enough, she had a wall-to-wall porcelain doll collection. Just thinking of it today, many years later, it creeps me out. I kind of knew that entering that room was possibly the stupidest idea I ever had. And oh boy, I was right. We locked the door back up and went back upstairs to play some PS3. Nothing really happened that night. A few weeks later, we had a late night at his place, and I was once again using the bathroom. I was standing with my back to the door, and I heard the door to the doll room open up slowly. I just ignored it. Suddenly, I hear dog nails scratch up against my door. Us dog people know this sound from anywhere. This spooked me a lot, even to this day. I gathered everything holy in me and swung the door open, only to find nothing. My friend left the key in the door, so I locked it back up and told my friend. My friend told me that the house got some weird history. There was a reason that they had no animals in the house, and the few animals they ever had didn't survive long. I can't tell the reason, but it's obscure and very disturbed. This is where it gets a little too much, and to this day still haunts me every now and then. We were playing some PS3 again, and my bladder is not made for large quantities of Coca-Cola. So, bathroom I go. I didn't even notice the doll door, but I just stormed into the bathroom and did my thing. Suddenly I hear dog nails walking on concrete floor outside the door. So I wash my hands and swing open the door. And whatever that thing was, I'll never forget. It was a medium-sized dog with very messy fur. And you know when you take a picture of a dog? The reflective eyes? That was how the eyes looked. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but it was only about 1 second, and it faded out of existence. I was done being alone in this basement. My friend didn't really believe me. To be honest, I didn't really believe me either. But I got him convinced to try and catch this thing on video. But our crappy phone cameras were about 10 pixels of darkness, and that wouldn't work. So I did some research and found one of those ghost investigator teams with cameras and flashy things, and told them about it. They were very hyped to spend a few hours in the basement and doll room. They got all their stuff set up and we sat 2 floors up, playing some more PS3. After a little while, we heard a lot of shouting and his front door slammed shut. So he went down there to see what the heck happened. All their things, cameras and all their ghost-busting equipment, was still there. So we went outside and spoke with them. They said that they would come back for their stuff in the morning, and then we would talk. They were shook to their inner cores. I went home and my friend went to bed. I was down there at 9 a.m. the next morning. But by then, they already got their stuff packed up and left. My friend told me that they caught the door opening and something launched at them and haunted them out of the basement. I asked if they had any evidence, or at least something to show for it, and no, all their footage, except for the door opening, got corrupted. I was so sad, but I'll never forget their faces. By this stage, his parents divorced and his mum moved out and took her doll collection with her. But the thing in the basement stayed there. It was more rare that something went bump in the night, but to this day I still walk by his old house, and every 8 to 10 months, the house gets new owners or is vacant. I wonder why.
There is a little background to this story, and it starts with my best friend. My best friend is called Joan, and her room was in the basement of her mother's house, so that's where we spent most of our time when I would go over. The minute you would descend the stairs to the basement, your blood would run cold, and chills would go down your spine, and you'd feel like you were being watched from the very moment you take a step. I, to this day, refuse to go into that basement alone. Joan, my best friend, for all intents and purposes, started to tell me stories of how at the foot of her bed there would be a tall, shadowy figure, so tall his head went through the ceiling. She would sometimes wake up, pulled halfway off the foot of her bed like something had yanked her. So she had her room saged, as well as doused in holy water, and then blessed, and finally pinned a rosary to the wall right behind where the figure stood. But alas, none of it helped. Of course I believed her, but I wasn't sure if maybe there could be any other explanation, until one night when I spent the night. We slept on couches in the main room of her basement. It was just like any other sleepover. We played video games, watched movies, the usual, and then fell asleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to something standing over me. The best way I can describe it is that it was super tall and shadowy. The next time I came over, I offered to bring my Ouija board. If something happened, cool. If not, nothing lost. We set it up in her basement, discussed the rules, and began. At first, not much happened, but we were patient. Then we started getting responses. The room felt cold. It felt like we were being watched from every single angle. Then the planchette moved to hello. We looked at each other, suspicious of each other's possible interference, but you could tell neither of us had anything to do with it. We asked its age. It said 5. We asked if it was a boy or a girl, and it said boy. At this time, we both asked if the other were moving it at all, and we both said no. Joan had genuine concern in her eye, but I knew I wasn't moving it. Next, we asked its name. Ziggy is what it told us. We asked how it passed away. It said fire. We tried to make small talk, inquiring about its favorite food and color, but it wanted nothing to do with that. It spelled a lot of things incorrectly and finally stopped responding altogether. We said thank you and goodbye, and my friend blessed her basement again, and to this day she is so freaked out she won't touch a Ouija board anymore. After doing further research, it said that the letter Z and children's personas, along with misspelled words, are common patterns when speaking to demons, which freaked us out enough. But we got to talking to someone who is also very into the paranormal, and she was reminded of something that completely went over our heads. Spirits can lie too. Whatever we spoke to that day likely wasn't telling the truth, and there was probably never a little boy called Ziggy.
This was back in 2005 when I was 10 years old and still lived in my old neighborhood. My house was very creepy. You would see things out of the corner of your eye and see shadows moving. Well, this is about my corner room of the basement, where the old spirit was. I never really cared about seeing the shadows in the house because I was sleeping upstairs, sharing a room with my brother, so I thought I would be safe. Then, he started to sleep in the basement, so I followed him down there. He didn't let me share the room, so I took the corner room next to him. One day I was taking a nap and then woke up all suddenly, but I didn't think anything of it. So I went to the bathroom, did my business. I came back to my room and I couldn't believe what I saw. I saw myself on my bed sleeping. I didn't come to grips with it until I heard chains moving. I looked towards the end of my bed and saw an old man chained up. It looked like he was trying to talk to me, but I started to scream. Then I felt being pulled toward myself and back to my body. I woke, screaming. My parents came downstairs and came into my room. They asked me, "What's wrong?" I told them about what happened. The look on my mother's face had confirmed that it wasn't a dream. She had told me the exact same thing had happened to her, but thought it was a dream. Now that we both had the same thing happen to us, she called a friend to see if it was a dream or not. My friend's mum had a gift. She could see things others couldn't, and sometimes astral project. Well, as soon as she walked into my room, she gasped. She could see the old man chained up by the bed. She went to him and started asking him why he was chained up. Apparently, he was chained up by some white people back in the 50s because he was a black man. He passed away by starvation and dehydration. The lady came and told us that all we needed to do was call a priest and bless the house, and everything should be fine. The week after, a priest came in and started to bless the whole house. My mum's friend went back to the room. The old man was gone. Needless to say, I never slept in that room again.
I heard this story from an old friend, someone who has never believed in ghosts and thought I was stupid for believing in that stuff. However, despite his severe skepticism, he admitted that there was one moment in his life that he can't explain, and he would have written it off as hallucination were it not for his older brother and cousin being there as well. My friend was around 9 years old and was playing with his brother and their cousin in their cousin's basement. They were throwing darts at an antique dartboard the cousin's dad had bought from an old bar that closed down. It was in great condition and was barely used. It was housed in a floating cupboard type thing made from wood, and on the top of the board case was a large wooden sculpture of the face of a traditional-looking Native American Indian. And with its eye being made from glass, it apparently made the face very realistic. Anywho, as they were playing their game, they immediately froze when they suddenly heard a loud but old male's voice coming from the corner of where the board was. It had happened so suddenly that they honestly couldn't tell what it was saying or where it came from. After a minute of standing there confused, they continued throwing darts until they saw movement and heard the voice shout, "What are you doing that for? Stop that!" And it was then they realized the movement they saw was the sculpture's head turning towards them as its face contorted into a vicious, angry look and was yelling at them. They immediately crapped themselves and ran upstairs crying and telling the adults what happened. And the only person who believed them was my friend's mum, as she knew her kids only cried when something serious happened. She went downstairs herself, and she swears up and down that when she reached the bottom landing of the stairs and turned to look at the dartboard, she realized the face was turned directly towards her, and she says its eyes felt so real that she couldn't help feel but watched by its gaze. Of course, no one believed her, but still to this day, she and the boy swear up and down what they saw, and it became a sort of urban legend amongst his family. So yeah, a shouting dartboard.
Back in 2014 to 2015, I was in high school and living with my parents. My parents were heavy on Christianity growing up, so I was raised going to church 2 times a week. My mum is extremely spiritual as well. Anyways, for years my mum kept telling everyone that there was a lot of spiritual warfare that was going on in our house. Everybody in my family thought she was just crazy, but I strongly believe it was true. My sisters started going down the wrong path. My dad was apparently cheating on my mum for years, etc. My parents started noticing some weird type of feces in our basement window wells. So one night, my mum asked me to help her find out what it was by going into the basement with the lights off and only using a flashlight. We went down there and were quietly waiting to see if we could figure out what it was. When all of a sudden, we heard a whisper that was so loud it almost felt like it was coming from a surround sound speaker. It was almost as if somebody came right up into both our ears and whispered. It immediately sent chills down my whole body as well as my mum's. We both froze for a second, and my mum said, "What was that? Was that you?" And I said, "No, what was that?" And we both bolted up the stairs, screaming. We refused to go back down that night, and my dad tried to say we were just crazy and hearing things. I've never felt so uncomfortable and violated in my entire life. Something definitely whispered into our ears, but we couldn't figure out what it had said. Still to this day, thinking about it freaks me out. Since then, my parents divorced and sold the house. Growing up, I had experienced a few strange things in that house, as did my sisters as well. Sometimes we would hear what almost sounded like a phone vibrating in the basement, but we couldn't ever figure out where it was coming from. It happened multiple times, in a span of 5 years. I truly believe there was a demonic entity messing with my family. What are your thoughts or input on what this could have possibly been?
This happened a few years ago. Things with my mom were rough at the time, so a close friend and his mom insisted I stay with them for a while. I didn't really want to. I've always felt weird sleeping in other people's houses. Even as a kid, it gave me this low-level anxiety I couldn't explain. I wasn't in a great place mentally, so I agreed. Their house was an older, rural place with a partially finished basement. That's where I was staying. My room had 2 doors, one to the main basement, and one to a small utility/storage room. On the first night there, I crashed hard. Grief exhaustion is real, guys, and sometimes in the early morning while it was still dark out, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening. Now, this wasn't a house-setting noise. It was the distinct click of the handle and the slow push of the door. So there was me rolling over thinking my friend's mom was checking on me. But instead, a man walked in. He was an older guy in his late 50s or early 60s in a blue flannel shirt and overalls with work boots, and he was holding a worn tool bag in one hand. He looked completely solid. He reached over and turned the light on. The bulb came on normally, and the room lit up like any other morning. He looked directly at me, like he was assessing me. Then he walked across the room and went through the second doorway into the utility room. I remember thinking, oh, someone must be fixing something, and then drifted off. When I woke up again, it was morning. The room was dark, the light was off, both doors were closed the way I'd left them. but I felt something weird. I checked the utility room and nothing looked moved. There were no tools or footprints, and I couldn't notice anything disturbed. Upstairs, I casually asked my friend's mum if someone had been working in the basement earlier that morning, which is where I was asleep. She looked confused and said it had just been the two of us in the house all night. I described the guy, blue flannel overalls, grey beard, and holding a tool bag. She went quiet, but not in a "I know that ghost" way, more like she was trying to process something. She told me the property had been owned by her grandfather decades ago. He'd been a farmer. There were old stories about him being stubborn and refusing to modernize, sticking to older methods even when it hurt the business, and he died long before she was born. She showed me an old black and white photo of him. The clothes were similar, not identical, but it was the same build. She told me something I hadn't noticed before. The utility room I said he walked into used to be part of the original workshop before renovations. This space had been where his tools were kept. The basement layout had changed over the years. Later that day, I went back down and stood in the doorway where I'd seen him disappear. There was no physical way someone could have entered or left without me hearing the exterior basement door open. And it locks loudly. I would have heard it. What really unsettled me, though, was the feeling. When I replayed it in my head, he didn't act like someone was visiting, he acted like someone checking something or checking on me. And the look he gave me wasn't confused like, "Who are you?" It was like recognition, like he expected someone to be there, just maybe not me. I stayed there a few more weeks and never experienced anything after that. I've tried to rationalize it as stress, grief, hallucination, or sleep paralysis, except I cannot deny the fact. I know I saw him.
Let me set the scene. I used to own a house near the mountains in the northern side of Colorado. This was a period of time where I had just gotten fired from my job because of COVID-related reasons and was home alone. I lived with my roommate at the time, but he went out to some club that night, leaving me alone with my dog. I hate to even think of this, and this is the first time I've ever told anyone besides my neighbors. It was around 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I was watching Friends on the TV. While watching, I heard what sounded like boxes shuffling around in the basement. My dog immediately noticed this and brought his head up. Our basement wasn't finished, and we had a window down there which wasn't in good shape, so I just had brushed it off, thinking that the wind was making noises. After a while, the noise never stopped. I decided to grab my light and head down there with my dog. I grabbed my light from the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. I started walking down the stairs, calling my dog. The only thing odd was that my dog decided not to come down and was making that high-pitched noise dogs make. He refused to go down in the basement and just stood at the top of the stairs. To give you some perspective on how my basement was laid out, all of my extra stuff from my childhood, like clothes and such, was on the back right corner, so when you walk down there, they were on the very right. That is where the stuff is. All of my roommate's stuff is right next to mine on the left, and there was a bench with all the previous owner's stuff that they left there. So while going down there, the sound was still very clear, and it was getting louder and louder the further I got in there. I saw the window open and making noises, and decided to go close it. As soon as I closed it, it felt like a hand grabbed my leg. But it wasn't a normal hand. It was super hot. My legs were swooped back and I fell down. All I can remember from this point on was my dog barking extremely loud. I then woke up and found myself in the closet of my roommate's bedroom. I walked downstairs and looked at the time, and it was 3 a.m. My roommate wasn't back yet. I literally looked at the clock, grabbed my phone and dog, and ran outside the front door. I went over to the neighbor's house, around a mile away. I ran there in bare feet. I didn't have a car at the time, by the way. When I got to the neighbors, that I barely knew, I rang the doorbell extremely fast, and around a minute later a man opened the door and asked why I was ringing his door this late at night. I could tell he was quite frustrated with me. I told him everything, and he said that the previous owners moved out because the husband of the house ended up hanging himself in the basement. We talked for a bit while I let my dog run around in the back. I called my roommate to tell him not to go home and come over to the neighbors. Around an hour later, he showed up, and we all just sat there and talked about what had happened. Around 10 in the morning, I headed back to my house with my roommate to find the sofa flipped, all the doors open, and the cabinets in the kitchen all open with dishes on the floor broken. I decided to go live with my sister and sell the house around 2 months later. To this day, I'm not sure what that was and haven't had any other experiences. By the way, something that I didn't tell was that I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I've heard that ghosts thrive off bad energy or whatever. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think it was or how to explain it.
A little history lesson. The Battle of Chickamauga was the second bloodiest battle during the Civil War, and only lasted 2 days, with a casualty rate of approximately 34,624. Not to mention, we also lie in the foothills of the Appalachian mountain range, which is a place that's already soaked in blood. Let me tell you about the Red House. When I was about 11 years old, my family and I moved into an old red farmhouse about a mile from the Chickamauga battlefield. This was the last house we all lived in together. When you pulled in the driveway, there was a covered front porch with 2 white columns that stood out placed against the dark red paint on the house. I was excited for the first time. This would be a house where I didn't have to share a room with my brother. At first, it was perfect. As we were moving in, I noticed a locked door. I asked my mum where it went, and she said that she didn't know. It's probably an unfinished attic, and the landlord just locked it for safety reasons. That was good enough answering for me. I continued taking boxes to different rooms in the house. The last box I grabbed went to the back room, the laundry room. As I walked through the house, the excitement began to fade, and that was when it was replaced with fear that began to flood my body. I can't explain why though. It was still a bright summer day somewhere around 90 degrees, but the back room gave me chills. As I walked to the wall, I noticed a door, but it wasn't on the wall, it was on the floor. I had never seen one in real life, so I walked over and tried to open it. I struggled for a moment, but eventually the lock gave way and the door rushed open. It was about a 3-foot drop to the dirt floor below. The fear in my body intensified. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran back to the living room to tell someone about the cellar that I had opened. I first ran into my older brothers, Sean and Tony, and told them, and they wanted to check it out for themselves. As they went into the cellar, I begrudgingly followed. Once we were in the cellar, I felt this heavy set of eyes staring at us from the dark. I clung to my brother's arm as we walked across the dirt floor. I couldn't shake that feeling. We climbed out, and I felt something brush against my leg. For the following weeks, I would often feel the same set of eyes watching me from different areas of the house. Like any other child, I was terrified of the pitch darkness that came at nightfall. One night I was drifting off to sleep, and something felt off as I watched the light plugged into the wall flicker. As I was sleeping, I dreamt that I could see myself laying in bed. As I watched myself sleep, I began to shiver. Just then I heard a creak come from my closet. As I entered the closet, I reached upwards to pull the string to turn the light on. As my hand wrapped around the string, the floor fell from beneath my feet. I fell to the dirt floor of the cellar. I examined my body for cuts or bruises, but before I could finish, I slowly looked up from my knees to be met by a concrete slab that had not been there before. On top of the slab, laid a decaying corpse. It wasn't just any corpse, though. It was my brother, who had passed away a few years prior. Behind him was a woman with long, stringy black and grey hair, a tattered, dirty burgundy long-sleeve cloak. I felt the tear well up in my eyes. I backed away from the woman. In a split second, she snapped her head up from the slab, and I jumped from my feet, running to the closed cellar door, thinking she was right behind me. I fumbled up the stairs, pushing my way through the door, running from the back room back to my bedroom. I slammed and locked the door, jumping back into my bed, bawling under my covers, and eventually I fell back asleep as the sun began to creep into my windows. Once I finally woke up, I stood up from my bed and noticed that my legs were scraped, bruised, and covered in dirt. I think it's important to say I still have this dream every so often, and it happened 12 years ago now. But was it really a dream?
I was inspired to post this, probably my third odd experience, after reading a post here that reminded me of it. It happened probably when I was about 5, I want to say. It was before my family moved states, and we lived in a 2-story house in New England. I'd say our house was at least 100 years old. That doesn't exactly explain the phenomenon I witnessed, but maybe it had been the site of another house at one time. I'm not sure. A little backstory. I was a pretty sensitive kid and very in tune, especially around this age. My mum told me she'd often be thinking of something like, I want to make chicken for dinner. And then I'd ask her if we could have chicken for dinner. That sort of funny thing. It seems dumb and silly, but I also think it's a bit telling. Our laundry units were in the basement of this house. My mum never liked going down there much because it was wet and pretty dark. It smelled like earth. One day she was carrying me down with her to put a load of laundry in the machine. I asked her, and I remember this pretty clearly, who those people in the corner were. She freaked out and asked what I was talking about. I remember I saw 2 people there, sort of see-through, and floating above the ground in the upper corner. One was an adult woman, one was a young boy. They both had buckles on their shoes, I told my mum. Note, I was too young to know about pilgrims or old-fashioned clothing at this age. I didn't learn history in school yet at all. They were wearing odd clothes too. I told my mum, the mum looks angry, but the little boy says it's okay. I remember that. The apparition of the woman did look very unhappy, and it scared me. But her son spoke to me and told me it was okay. Anyway, after relaying all this to my mum, she freaked out and we went upstairs. I'm not sure what it was. Like I said, I wasn't learning about history at this young age. I didn't watch much TV either because I went to an alternative school. I was always kind of put off by old things and scared of them. We lived in a very historically rich town and neighborhood for the War of Independence.
I'm a 19-year-old female and have lived in the same house since I was around a year old on the outskirts of a small farm town in Canada. My family has had their fair share of supernatural experiences, but I want to talk about and maybe get some clarification on the ongoing one that bothers me the most. I am a middle child, and I have 3 siblings. My older sister is 10 years older, my brother 7 years older, and my younger sister 6 years younger. When I was younger, around 4, I kept having strange experiences in our house. For context, we live in an area that has lots of indigenous and war history. As a child, my bedroom was in the basement. Nobody likes the basement. It's unsettling and creepy, even though it doesn't look creepy. There is the old laundry room, which is the only unfinished part, and as a child, I was terrified of it. My playroom was outside of it, and I would always keep the door to it shut. I used to hear someone in there, a man, that would talk to me. I'd have conversations through the door and freak out my mother and siblings. I'd call him John, and I don't really remember the conversations, just that they happened, and that was the first weird occurrence. Around that time, I was playing in my bedroom, which faced the side of the stairs to the basement, but a wall blocked the side so I could only see if someone was on the last step from my room. I was playing with my dolls in my room when I got the sense that someone was watching me, so I turned around and saw someone peering around the wall sideways. I could only see their wide, piercing eyes, dark hair and thick, dark eyebrows, as well as their hands holding on to the wall. My brother had similar features, so I angrily told him to stop and stormed upstairs to tell my mum to get him to stop trying to scare me. She told me to go back to playing, and she would deal with it, and that I did. Years later, my mum told me that my brother had never left his room, so it could not have been him. His room was on the top floor, and the living room where my mum was sitting was on the main floor. In order to get down to the basement, he would have had to pass her. To this day, he swears it was not him. I still remember these experiences vividly, and it was extremely unsettling and almost sinister. A year or two after that, my older sister heard whistling and footsteps on the porch below her bedroom window, as she was on the top floor across from my brother. This is now my room. It was wintertime, and so my dad went outside to check, and sure enough, there were footprints in the snow. The police said there was nothing that could be done, but suggested putting up cameras as we have a large property. The whistling continued into the summer, when my parents and I went camping, while my two older siblings stayed home. They were taking out the garbage cans one night when they noticed a dark figure hiding behind the neighboring cans, watching them. My brother noticed it first and asked my sister if she saw it, and she just told him to run. We still did not know who or what that was. We don't have many neighbors, and this particular neighbor was an old man who was asleep at the time. My brother was very into the supernatural, and as a teen he was playing with a Ouija board in his room. Whoever he was talking to told him that they have been in my mum's life since she was 12. My brother did not tell her about this, and instead asked her when she first started using Ouija. She said when she was 12. I know Ouija boards are a touchy subject and not super reliable, but I feel as though it is possibly relevant information. Around this time, my younger sister was around 3. She woke up screaming to the devil in our shared room and refused to sleep in there for weeks. This same night, my brother had come home from his friend's house after a depressing experience on the Ouija board where the spirits said they had hung themselves and the air turned cold, and everyone using it suddenly felt nauseous and distraught. He admitted this to me, and ever since that night, he would regularly wake up with strange marks and scratches on his body. No, it could not have been the cats, as he slept with his door closed and they were declawed. Then there was the time my older sister woke up to a man watching her sleep at the end of her bed with what she described as a potato head. She thought it was our father and asked what he was doing there. The figure then turned and walked out. My father had not entered her room that night. Last summer, I was home alone with my girlfriend. During the summer, my family goes camping and I am usually home alone aside from the cat. It was around 10 p.m. and my girlfriend was upstairs in my room while I was in the main floor bathroom getting ready to shower. I was by the window, which is pretty much on the porch, grabbing a towel from the cupboard when I heard the whistling. It was clearly a male voice, but the whistling was a sort of song I had never heard before. It was very pretty and almost tempting. It stopped after about 10 seconds. I thought I was imagining it and got closer to the window to listen, and it started again, except closer to the window this time. I bolted upstairs and told my girlfriend, who had no idea of the past history of the whistling. I called my parents, and my dad sent my neighbor who lives down the road to come and check the property, and he drove out from the campground to check. There was nothing. The motion lights we had added had not been triggered, and the cameras that were facing the area in front of the window captured nothing. I was horrified. It was my first time hearing the whistling. I spoke to my sister, and it was the same as she had heard. This would be around 10 years since she had experienced this. My mother told me yesterday that she first heard the whistling as a teen. I had no idea about this. She first heard it in a very stressful situation while she was hiding in the bathroom at her old apartment about 20 minutes from here. She heard it when we first moved into the house, almost 20 years ago. She heard it outside her window when my sister did. Hearing this made my blood chill. My mum has not had an easy life and has had tons of experiences of her own, but this was one she had omitted to me until recently. I've always heard my name being whispered in this house and nowhere else, but chalked it up to old house noises. This has happened as recently as last week. It happened frequently in the summer while my family was gone, and my mother recently told me she experienced this and has been since she was around 12. I've never told anyone, in fear of sounding crazy. There's probably more that I'm forgetting, but since my mother told me about her hearing it since she was a teen yesterday, I've become quite anxious and unsettled. I want to know what it is and why it's happening. Could it be a Wendigo, or haunting, a demon? Or is my family just crazy? I would like any possible insight or commentary, please.